So this morning we'll be in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verses 41 through 50. Hear the word of the Lord. Now every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. His mother treasured Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
So I especially started to experience something when I went off to college that I began to find it a bit strange whenever I visited my home church that I'd spent most of my childhood in. I had all these people who knew me from when I was 4 or 5 years old, and they'd seen me, grow up this whole way. But suddenly, I felt very different from what I perceived, at least, to be their perception of me, right? Suddenly, my perception of myself is different from what they believe me to be. I no longer felt like the pastor's kids they all knew, or the kid that they remembered playing donkey in the Christmas plays, or whatever made up their image of me. I no longer felt like that. I felt like I developed my own identity. And I think that all of us find it at times a little awkward, or can remember times where it was a little awkward, to be around people who knew us when we were a lot smaller, maybe, or a lot younger, but they haven't seen us maybe in a while. When you're in your teens and your 20s, you often get the experience of people saying, "I knew you when you were just this big, or this tall, or whatever." That and when you're in your teens, especially, that whole category of comments can be very annoying. Right? It's something that I don't think a lot of people are excited about hearing again. There's a little bit of this feeling like maybe you're being patronized, or maybe and maybe there's more than a little bit of, well, of course I'm growing up, that's how life works, right? That's how this whole thing is meant to work. For slightly more mature human beings, I think there's a realization as well that people may remember us in our general demeanor, in our attitude, our behavior. They may remember us a lot differently than either we were then or than we are now. Then the annoyance is more based on, well, don't judge me based on who I was then, right? I still take responsibility for who I was, but that's not me anymore, right? I'm still not where I'd like to be, but I'm not that person anymore. I have a new identity. I'm a totally different person. I have totally different attitudes and behaviors, and maybe I'm not quite such a jerk that I was when you knew me the first time around, right? Jesus seems to experience something similar in our passage this morning. We see in verse 48 that his parents come and find him at the temple, and they're astonished. And his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." Jesus' response sounds a lot like many an irritated teen through the years. "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" "Of course I'd be here," Jesus seems to say. "Of course, I'm growing up. That's how the world works." It is then that we get the statement that while Jesus then went with them and was obedient, Mary treasured all those things in her heart. That's what it says in verse 51. I think this shows a thought that many parents and others have as someone, as their child grows up, or as this person that they hold dear, if they're not their child, grows up. There are moments where people realize, our boy's all grown up. Right? We didn't know exactly how he'd turn out, but this is a huge step along the way. Right? There's the moving up from elementary school. There's each stage along the school journey. There's graduations and marriages and all sorts of different things that mark these milestones. And Mary has gotten this news before about Jesus being the Messiah, saving his people from their sins. That's part of what the angel tells her about.
Amen.
However, hearing something and knowing what will happen are two different things. Hearing something's going to happen and seeing it happen are two very different things. Even though Mary knew the whole time that Jesus was supposed to be something special, and who doesn't want to believe that about their child? But it's a different thing to go and find him in the temple, astonishing everyone there. Hearing something and knowing what will happen are different things. Seems to me like this was not the way Mary had anticipated Jesus growing up to look like. She knew that the boy was going to be different. She knew he was going to be special, but it seems like the way that it starts to emerge is not a way that she had predicted, right? She wasn't ready for the way that him growing up would look like, what him growing up would look like. And finally, we get this statement in verse 52, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years, and in divine and human favor." Jesus was not done at this point growing up. This doesn't mark the end of Jesus' development. That's weird to say that about somebody we claim to be God in the flesh, but this is only the beginning of years of realization concerning his purpose and his calling. This is only the beginning of other people being shocked by the conduct and the words of Jesus. Next, we get his baptism. And when Jesus is baptized, there's a visible sign from above, and there's a voice that a lot of the people hear saying, "This is my Son, the beloved, in whom I'm well pleased." And then we get the various elements of his ministry and these various moments where either someone else or Jesus gets a little confirmation of who he is. Jesus, at the Transfiguration, we also get another voice from heaven. We get Jesus shining like the sun to everybody around, and his disciples are struck by it. We get Peter confessing that you are the Messiah, the Son of God. We get all these various elements within his ministry, and then we get him prophesying concerning his death, that he develops this understanding that this is something I'm going to have to do. And then him prophesying about rising again, something that no one had ever done by themselves. And no one had ever risen out of the dead by themselves. We get him prophesying about that, and then we get him actually dying and actually rising again. All of these show this continued development as a person in this world as Jesus grows more and more into his calling. And this ultimately results in Jesus at the ascension, when he gets raised up into heaven, that then he's raised up to reign. Right? And that's that's officially the moment of becoming the king that he's been meant to be this whole time. And so there's this long development of Jesus that, at least in the text, it is acknowledged here that this seems to be a milestone that begins this development. We get birth, and then we get 12 years old, and he's finally getting his life a little bit together. I wish I had my life together at 12. But there are three primary lessons I think that we can take from our passage today. The first is, as I've been talking about, there are tons of people out there who have a radically different perception of you than you do of yourself or than other people do of you. This changes even just depending on how this person is encountered. For instance, I thought of the basketball players and star LeBron James. Many people either hate LeBron because he's not Michael Jordan, or they love LeBron because they think he's better than Michael Jordan, or they love the way he plays, or they hate the way he plays. And then when you get off the court, others perceive him negatively because he makes political statements at times, and others perceive him positively because he makes political statements at times. And then finally, others see only all the philanthropic action he takes, or others completely ignore all the benevolent and good things that he does because they don't like him as a player, as someone who speaks to politics, or whatever it is. This results in, for LeBron James, just like for many others, or for yourself, lopsided views of LeBron by people who love you or hate you for particular reasons that they've, and maybe not hate, maybe just dislike, right? People who love you or they don't particularly like to be around you. And it's all based on their little sliver of your life that they've been able to observe, or their little sliver that they've emphasized. Depending on what side of people that we see or we observe or we admire more than the rest of them, that may make up our whole perception of that person. They may become just the person that works at the gas station for us, but they have a lot of life going on outside of that. This is especially true for people that we may not see in person for a while. Everyone's memory of you is likely very different from your own self-perception at this moment. However, it's not just me or us that are misunderstood, misestimated, underestimated, or maybe even overestimated in life. All people experience this feeling of misperception. All people are constantly shifting and growing, some positive directions and others in negative directions. This means that perhaps we should take this in mind and approach people with grace, knowing that our past perceptions of them and how they may act or how they may speak or how they may think may not be accurate to who they are or accurate to who they're trying to be. It also means that perhaps we should give people grace when they clearly don't understand who we are. A lot of people are simply running off of outdated and or incomplete information on you. They haven't done their research, at least not recently, and they need your help to get to know who you really are and or who you're really trying to be. They need to find you in the temple and ask you, what's been going on? Why weren't you with us? And then you can give them a snarky response like Jesus, or you can be a little more compassionate. The second thing that I think this passage teaches us here is to always be thinking about your conception of the past, Always be reflecting on the past in general and also your experiences with God. And Mary provides this example when she treasured all these things in her heart. Mary could have left this experience right there and not grown any in her knowledge of God from this moment. She could have left it at, well, I guess this kid is really going to be weird. It even notes that they did not understand what he said to them, is what it says in verse 50. Thus, she could have left it at that. I just don't get them. Plenty of parents have no clue what is going on with their kids. Why should the Mother of God in the flesh feel any different or be any different? Instead, she provides the model by treasuring, pondering, is the translation a lot of them use, pondering these things in her own heart. Surely letting her thoughts grow and develop into a fuller understanding of God's work in her Son. She took the time. It's hard to do this, to find the time, the open space to reflect. Sometimes it's simply not possible. As Matthew Kelly notes in his book, Life is Messy, that y'all were given, I would hope, life should be lived with maximum intentionality. But often we are conflicted and confused. When we act in these states, we usually cause pain and suffering to ourselves and others. Clarity is necessary to live with great intentionality. But finding that clarity is almost impossible in the midst of this crazy, noisy, busy world. That's why having time and silence and solitude each day is essential. You know, she needed to sit with her thoughts. A lot of people would call people, I suppose, like Mary, processors. That's what we always use in the work world. That some people can give you an answer immediately. And I like to pretend that I'm one of those people. Some people can give you an answer immediately, and other people need to go and sit with it for a little while. For me, I thought about my own process of developing my personal theology and how I always come back to my one bedrock, fundamental thought about God. It's that God is totally and completely good. That's something John Caputo, in his scripture memoir, Hoping Against Hope, he says that whatever we finally come to say about God, it must include life and more life. And that's how I think fundamentally about God, is that God must be a God of total and complete goodness. And so everything else must ultimately come back and work within that fundamental framework. And I justify that through my own experiences of God, through experiencing God's love and God's healing in my own life. And this also evidences the need, this verse here also evidences the need to reflect on our past experiences to see our growth. Growth of people is often so gradual. It's very seldom instantaneous and momentous. It's often so gradual that without thoughtful self-reflection, we'll miss it. The third aspect to keep in mind, the third lesson from this is, I believe, the most important of all. And it's that you are growing. If you didn't know that, you're growing. Jesus provides this example in verse 52. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years, and in divine and human favor. Jesus was not done growing up at his knowledge of the need for him to be in the temple. Him coming and asking questions and trying to learn and trying to give his own little answers at the age of 12 was not the end of Jesus and his development. Even in this story, he's attempting to hone his own knowledge. his own understanding of God. And this likely continues for him in the various Hebrew and rabbinical schools in the area surrounding Nazareth and Galilee. You are growing too, just like Jesus. At the very least, you, like Jesus, are increasing in years. In case you didn't know that, you're increasing in years. All of us every day we continue to live are increasing in years. However, the belief in historic Christian orthodoxy is that I am indeed growing better. Or at least, at the very least, I'm being given opportunities to grow better as I walk with God. I should be increasing in wisdom and divine and human favor as I walk with God in my daily life. The question we are left with is, what will be our response to God attempting to work this growth in our lives? Jesus, being wholly obedient and cooperative with the work of God in his life, was able to grow not just in years but also in wisdom and divine and human favor. Jesus represented something that I think few, if any, humans normally get to achieve, which is the straight up chart. You know, it's going straight up the whole time for Jesus. He's only increasing. He doesn't have any of the self-inflicted setbacks that we often experience. But the work of grace in our lives, it begins to try to grow us. From the very moment that we are born, God's prevenient grace, grace that comes before, is working in our lives to bring us to knowledge of God. And then when we finally accept the message of love, of grace, and of the gospel, then we experience justifying grace, which brings us out of the kingdom of this world and into the kingdom of God. And then we get the opportunity throughout the rest of our lives to experience the sanctifying grace of God working in us to grow us into something better, to grow us in wisdom and in divine and human favor, even as we grow in years. So the question for us today that I want to leave you with is, will you commit to working with God? Will you commit to letting God work on you to increase you in wisdom and favor in your own life? Will you grow? Or will you stay stuck in the past? Will you stay stuck in the present and be left only increasing in years? Will you grow, or will you stay stuck and be left only increasing? In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.